Hey everybody, and welcome to the Data Scotland Scottish Summer. It's not been so summery so far in Scotland. It's been a constant downpour of rain, but hopefully sunnier days are coming, and myself and Michael are so pleased to be part of this event and to talk with you all, and thank you so much for choosing to spend your time with us. We're going to deliver a session today on Azure Arc enabled data services. But before we do, let's do some quick introductions. My name is Lisa Clark, and I'm based in Dundee, Scotland, which is apparently the sunniest city in Scotland. I've been in the IT industry for 10 years. I know, crazy. And I'm part of Dell Technologies, focused on our Microsoft hybrid cloud portfolio, the Azure Stack portfolio. I'm super passionate about hybrid cloud and enabling customers to harness the power of hybrid. Last year, actually, when lockdown hit, I decided to throw my time and energy behind a podcast. So I launched Lisa at the Edge, which was awesome. I was also awarded Azure Community Hero and Inclusive Leader badges last year. And this year, I had the absolute pleasure of becoming Microsoft MVP, along with my friend and colleague, Michael. So I hope everyone's okay, but I have actually brought a non-Scottish colleague and friend with me to help me out with this talk, because Michael and myself work in the same team, but he's also a great mentor to me, and he's been helping me out a lot. So I hope that's okay. And I'm going to hand over to Michael to introduce himself.
Thanks, Lisa. Just like Lisa, I'm part of the Azure Stack Engineering Technologist team. I'm part of the team covering the Americas, focused on Azure Stack, so Azure Stack Hub and HCI. I've been with Dell since 2015, and prior to that was on the customer side. So most of my 20 years in IT has been on the customer side, doing things like support, development, application architecture, and of course, my first love, database administration. I've been an active member of the IT community for SQL, Azure, .NET, and I love to take any opportunity to speak with people and talk tech. And I am based in upstate New York with my wife and my 2-year-old daughter.
Awesome. And just checking in, it hasn't been too summery for you either, has it? In fact, you've been having quite Scottish weather.
I have. It has been a lot of overcast and a lot of rain, and we actually had a frost warning overnight last night. So.
Oh wow. Yeah, I had to put my heating on the other day. Fingers crossed for some more sunny weather, especially hopefully when this airs, there is some sunshine and you're chilling, but you're with us and learning all about Azure Arc enabled data services. So our agenda for today is we're going to give you an overview of Azure Arc enabled services. Then we're going to do a demo. So we're going to do a demo from both the infrastructure professional side and the data professional side. So Michael is going to show us basically setting up Azure Arc for data services. Then I'm going to try my hand at creating a database. And yeah, we're going to show you basically the view from each side, which will be really cool. And then we're going to round up with a quick summary at the end. So let's get stuck into learning a bit more about Azure Arc enabled data services, and actually Azure Arc in itself to begin with. So Microsoft with Azure take a really comprehensive approach when it comes to hybrid, and they offer a bunch of different capabilities in that space. When you think about it, Azure, unlike Google and AWS, Google and AWS were really cloud native first. But Microsoft has grown up in the enterprise, much like Dell Technologies, and they have years and years of experience helping customers run, manage, and bring technology to customers and their services on premise before cloud and before all this cloud native stuff. And that really shines through with Microsoft's hybrid portfolio of Azure Stack and Azure Arc. They have the tagline hybrid by design, and it's definitely true when it comes to Microsoft Azure. So enabled by Azure Arc, you can basically bring Azure services to any existing infrastructure, including other clouds. So if you're running a virtual machine in AWS, Microsoft want to enable you to bring Azure services to run there. If you're running virtual machines on premise, whether it be on VMware or Hyper-V, they want to enable you to run their services wherever. This is really Azure, sort of Azure everywhere. And what they really want you to be able to do is build Azure consistent new cloud infrastructure in your own data center with Azure Stack. So that's a topic that's near and dear to me and Michael's heart. We work on the Azure Stack team at Dell Technologies. Super powerful portfolio in there. 3 products: Azure Stack Hub, Azure Stack HCI, and Azure Stack Edge. We can maybe do another session on that. But then Microsoft also want to enable you to be able to extend artificial intelligence to the edge with edge devices with Azure IoT. So you can run machine learning and advanced analytics close to the users and the data. And as a result, gain real-time insights and deliver immersive experiences at the edge to your business, opening up new business opportunities. And edge is definitely a hot topic, and I think we're going to see that take over the next few years. The next few years will be spent defining edge, just like we spent defining what is cloud. And basically, they want to enable you to do all of this with Azure Arc as the single control plane to seamlessly manage and secure your IT resources, like Linux, Windows, virtual machines, but also Kubernetes clusters across multi-cloud, on-prem, and at the edge. So let's take a little bit of a closer look into Azure Arc. So Azure Arc enabled infrastructure will allow you to connect your resources which live outside of Azure today, anywhere, and operate them as if they are native Azure resources, using the same management tools and services that Azure provides, which is pretty cool. And Azure Arc enabled services will give you the flexibility to deploy fully managed Azure services anywhere, on-premise, in other public clouds, or at the infamous edge, so that you can take the benefit and advantage of cloud native capabilities such as scalability, fast deployment, and always up to date, which is super key. And we're going to talk about that a bit today as well. And what's really awesome about all this as well is you can initiate and manage these deployments right from within the Azure portal. So they really do want to take Azure services and Azure management and governance and the goodness of the Azure portal and ARM and be able to deliver that wherever a customer needs it to be. So we've spoken a little bit about Azure Arc, very high level, but what Azure Arc is, and let's take a look at sort of some more use cases, if you will. So if you have workloads, like we said, running outside Azure, you can now organize, which is like one of my favorite words, you can organize them all of your resources consistently within Azure. Again, whether those are Windows, Linux, SQL servers, containers, you can govern and control all of them in a neat, nice way within the Azure portal. And we'll use the phrase from a single pane of glass, because to be fair, we are getting closer and closer to that single pane of glass. Then you can leverage cloud native app development practices, meaning that you can use DevOps techniques to deploy and manage your Kubernetes apps at scale and make sure they are configured consistently as you build out Kubernetes-based applications. You can also standardize change control and configuration management using GitOps, which is a popular way for Kubernetes to be operated and managed. So basically, this is allowing you to extend Azure management across all of your environments. do at scale Kubernetes app management. And also what's quite cool about this as well is you can deploy and manage your data services where you need them to be, right? So for latency or compliance reasons, you want them to run in the best location suited to them, but you want them to also be able to benefit from this new cloud native technology. So you want to be using always the most current technology to seamlessly manage and secure your data assets wherever they might be. But also now you can access Azure security capabilities such as Azure Threat Detection. But you can centrally manage and access all of your security policies for all of your resources with role-based access control. And therefore you can really enforce compliance across your workloads, regardless of where they reside. So on-prem, in an office, in the data center, at the edge, in the public cloud, which is pretty cool. Okay, so let's dig in a little bit deeper to the enabled data services. You basically now can bring these services to any infrastructure, like we've said, for those customers who want to keep those workloads on-prem. Microsoft recognize that, and they want to enable you to take advantage of all the goodness that is Azure. So you'll always be current, meaning updates and upgrades are fully automated, and deployment is controlled by all your policies. So goodbye to things running out of support and your database is running out of support. Next, they want to enable you to bring that cloud elasticity on premises that you're used to in the cloud. Of course, that will be within the limits of your infrastructure, but they want to be able to provide you that ability to scale up and scale down and scale out without application downtime. And yes, so I got a little bit lost there, but I don't want to repeat myself. Basically, it's very cool. But obviously with this as well, you'll then get the benefits of the option to use modern cloud billing model. So you can get really granular on your cost efficiency across your hybrid infrastructure. And again, you're paying on that consumption basis, which means you have a lot more control. We can just take a quick look here at Azure Data Services at a glance. So again, remember, you can run any of these on any hardware. Dell Technologies obviously would be the best. Azure Stack, you can run it on Azure Stack. And Microsoft are going to work with their partners on reference architectures, but hardware doesn't necessarily need to be certified by Microsoft, which is quite interesting. This shows really how far they're going with what they're doing in terms of Azure Arc to enable you to run your workloads anywhere. Currently, 2 data services, Azure SQL Database and Azure Database for PostgreSQL, are in public preview. And we're going to take a look today at Azure SQL Database. But before we do that, we're going to hand over to Michael, who's going to walk us through the infrastructure side, which is where all the magic happens to allow all this to happen.
Thanks, Lisa. So basically what we have is a Kubernetes cluster. Underneath that Kubernetes cluster, we have a persistent storage layer. And then sitting on top of that, we're going to have a data controller. That data controller is the piece that talks to Azure and controls, it manages the data services. So the Azure SQL managed instance and the Postgres hyperscale are all managed through that controller. That controller, like I said, has the ability to talk to Azure, so you can, in a connected model, you can go straight to Azure, provision these resources, and they'll spin up locally on premises. Or you can talk to the controller directly through the controller API, through the AZ Data CLI, or through Azure Data Studio. Have the ability to connect right to the controller from Azure Data Studio and start to manage it that way. But all of the capabilities, scaling, backup, provisioning, patching, high availability, is all handled through that Arc container and is all done in a Kubernetes native fashion.
So Kubernetes is really what allows all of this to happen, to bring those Azure Arc enabled data services to the infrastructure.
Absolutely.
Okay, cool. So with that said, then what we're going to do is we're going to jump into a demo. Got a lovely picture of Stirling Castle here, and we're gonna jump into a demo, and Michael is going to take us from the infrastructure professional view. So the person who has to get this set up, get our infrastructure, Azure Arc ready and enabled so that users can come on and just deploy their databases like they normally would without really noticing that it's not in Azure, which blows my mind. So with that said, we're going to hand over to Michael to show us this.
Thank you. So I'm going to start out. As Lisa said, this can be on any Kubernetes flavor. We happen to be using Azure Stack Hub as our underlying infrastructure, and our Kubernetes cluster is an AKS engine cluster sitting on Azure Stack Hub. So the first thing I'm going to do is just pop over into the resource group so that you can see the Kubernetes cluster. Right. So I have and 6 worker nodes. These are all using Linux agents. Right. I have taken the extra step of connecting this Kubernetes cluster to Azure Arc through Azure Arc enabled Kubernetes. So this is what would be considered a connected Kubernetes cluster. By doing that, if we jump over into Azure itself, you can see I have my Azure Arc Kubernetes cluster. It is connected. Right. And then in the extensions, I have enabled the Arc Data Services extension. Right. The next step from here is going to be to create the data controller. So you see Azure Arc Data Controller. Say create. Now I am using the connected model. So because this is an Arc enabled Kubernetes cluster, I can use this direct mode. If I was doing this on any other Kubernetes cluster that wasn't tied in to Azure, then I can do this as an indirect. But for this one, I'm going to do direct. Specify the resource group that I'm going to create this in. Give it a controller name. For the configuration profile, I'm using the AKS engine, so I'm going to pick Arc AKE. My storage class is going to be default, and I am set up using a load balancer. I have a custom location defined, so I'll pick my custom location. This just defines the cluster that I'm going to that I want this controller created on. Then I'll define the login credentials for the controller. Okay, and that's it. That's all that's involved in the creation of the controller. So I can go through and next and create. I'm not going to do this. I've already built the controller for the sake of expedience. So I'm not going to come through here. I'm not going to complete this process, but I will just jump into the controller itself so that you can see it. So here is my Azure Arc Data Controller. It's in direct mode. So the controller itself, the the information for the controller, the metadata is stored at ECUS, but this controller itself is actually running on my Kubernetes cluster. So if I jump over here, excuse me, to Kubernetes, and just do a git pods for that namespace, arcdc. You can see that I already have my controller present and running on the system. All right, so those are the pods that make up the Arc Data Services controller. Right. The rest of this is related to logging, metrics, the management proxy, things like that. All right, so once we've got that controller created, we can hand it off to the data professional to go ahead and create their database.
I'm on mute. Awesome. And here we have our data professional, Zach, the main coon, who's going to take over. And all that Zach is interested in is the fact that he wants an Azure SQL database. So let's go and see how easy that is for him, and whether he notices or not, whether that's actually in Azure. So we are going to go to create a resource here. And then we're going to search for Azure SQL Managed Instance. And you'll see here, we've got the normal Azure SQL Managed Instance, or we've got the option of Azure Arc. So we're going to go with Azure Arc because we know that that's what we want. We're going to click create. So that's really the only difference there that you're seeing about whether it's in Azure or whether it might be somewhere else. We know that the resource script that we want to create this in is in Arc Kate's resource script. And then we are going to create an instance name. So let's go with Edinburgh Data. And custom location, we're using the same location that Michael showed earlier for so Dundee. Service type, we're also going to pick load balancer here. And then I'm going to set up some user credentials here. So let's keep those passwords nice and safe. Okay, awesome. Then we're going to review and create. So it passed the validation. You can see here that it's currently free, and that's because it's in public preview. So that will change when it is GA'd. And then we're just going to click here, create. And you can see up here, deployment in progress. And it's deploying my SQL database. So really, they are the only inclination that I had that this might not be running in an Azure data center was when I had to search for Azure SQL Managed Instance, and we've seen the drop down of just the normal one and then the Azure Arc version. And I think, is it safe to say, Michael, that's kind of the only real way that a data professional would know that it was any different?
That and the selection of the custom location.
Yes, very true. So yeah, just those two sort of highlights. That's the only difference. Our deployment is complete, super fast. That's good to know. And then we can go to our resource, and here's our database. You can see the external endpoint here for the database. We can open Azure Data Studio and work with the database in Azure Data Studio. But yeah, that was pretty simple. So let's now do the test and go back and see whether we can see it from Michael's view.
Okay, so I'm just going to run that same command again. I'm just going to do get pods from kube control. And little trouble with Zoom it here. And here we can see we have the new container. The status is container creating. So what's happened is Azure has talked to the data controller that's running on this Kubernetes cluster, and it's told the controller, I need you to spin up a new database instance. Here's the information for that instance. And the data controller has now spun up this Kubernetes pod, or is in the process of spinning up this Kubernetes pod using the latest SQL Server image from the Microsoft Container Repository. Right, so we're spinning up the latest version of SQL Server as maintained by Microsoft. Right. So from here, what we can do is I have this data controller already connected within Arc Data Studio, or excuse me, Azure Data Studio. So if I just do a refresh here, we'll go ahead and refresh here as well. You'll be able to see those additional managed instances show up. Right, so now you can see I have the initial two databases that were there, Dundee data, Scottish data, and I have the new one that Lisa just created. And it shows me the status is created. Okay. So I have the ability to manage these through Azure Data Studio. I can connect to them. So for instance, if I want to connect to one of these databases, I have this one that we had created before. There's the external endpoint. So that's the address that I'll use to connect to that instance. I have dashboard information. So if I wanted to see the Grafana dashboard to see metrics for that database, I can come over to the Grafana and see the metrics for that. So this is all handled, the creation of all that is handled and monitored behind the scenes through Arc Data Services. So all this stuff's being reported, the Grafana dashboard is set up for you. It's just a matter of clicking that link and opening the dashboard. Right. You also have the ability to, within Azure Data Studio, you can click on connection strings, and it will show you a pre-formatted connection string for a number of different common languages and database connectivity types. So it makes it very easy once your database is stood up to grab your connection string, just drop in your password information and drop that into your application config file. All right. So here I've already connected to that database. So I'm just going to say new query. Right. And just to give you an idea, just going to run git version on this. So you can see this is the version information that comes back from that container. So when I asked for, or when Lisa asked for the new database instance, it spun up that SQL on container image on that Kubernetes cluster, and it's reported back as an Azure Arc managed instance. So I don't have any other, I don't have any databases created under this. I just have the basic system databases. But from here, I can create my database. I can start to deploy my objects. I can start loading data into it. I have a database that's ready to use. All right, and then I don't have to use Azure Data Studio to do this. I can also go directly against AZ data through the command line. So just to use a command against that controller, I'm just saying, give me a list of all the Azure SQL managed instances within that cluster. And this will come back here momentarily. And it'll show me all three of those, Dundee, Edinburgh, Scottish, and you'll see all three of them are now in a ready state. So if we jump back to kube control, you'll notice that Edinburgh is now in a running state. So I can come back here, refresh this information.
I still can't get over the fact, Michael, that this database, the databases that we just created, aren't running in Azure, and yet you really wouldn't know.
No, and that's the idea. Right? It's supposed to be as seamless as possible.
Yeah.
So here I have my endpoint for that database. So if I do a new connection to that endpoint,
There's nothing like doing a live demo.
well, and apparently we were out of sync on the passwords.
Oh no!
But
it still works.
it does. So we have the database instance. I have the connection here. Once I get the corrected password from my colleague, then I would just connect up to that database and manage it just like any other database. And then as we look at back to Azure,
mm-hmm.
being able to see all of our SQL managed instances.
Yep.
And there they all are. So
yep.
I'm seeing the same thing, whether I manage it on premises through AZ Data,
mm-hmm.
Whether I manage it on-prem using Azure Data Studio,
mm-hmm.
or whether I manage this through the Azure portal directly, I get the same information in all locations. So it's all consistent.
Yeah, that's amazing. And then the data professional who's using the database, they can manage it from Azure. They've got all their connection strings to use whatever language that they like to use. Is there any other ways that they could hit and interact and manage their database if they wanted to?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, anything that you use to connect to the database. So you can connect up using Management Studio. You can connect up using Azure Data Studio. You can connect directly from your application. Any tool that you would use to connect and run queries against a SQL Server database, you can use to do that.
That's amazing. So basically, those the only two differences that someone would notice would be choosing Azure SQL Managed Instance - Azure Arc, and then selecting the custom location, but everything else is pretty much the same. That's amazing. That is amazing. And with that, let's just do a little summary on what we've covered today. So Azure Arc enabled data services currently in public preview, right, Michael? We think that that's going to change imminently. So, but it's as we currently speak, it's in public preview. But definitely going GA soon. So SQL Managed Instance and Postgres Hyperscale are the two services there under the data services category, because of course there is also Azure Arc for servers, but we won't get into that now. So yeah, some of the key points here are obviously what me and Michael have just demonstrated about basically how awesome it is that the data professional really won't notice whether something is in Azure or not, but also from the infrastructure professionals' perspective, all the different ways that they can manage and view all of their workloads, whether they're on-prem or whether in Azure. That, do you know what? I actually love this. Microsoft pitched what hybrid was. How many years ago was Hub released?
2017.
2017, right? And they pitched that, and we still use that slide today. I should have actually brought it into this deck, where they talk about the consistency in management and experience, and the consistency in the skills that you need, and the single pane of glass. And they talked about that in 2017, and they defined Hub as being that true hybrid. And now they've just gone that one step further with Azure Arc, and it's crazy to see. But that is, to me, that's the definition of hybrid. We won't go into that topic right now either, or we could overrun. But basically, everything that we've just gone through, those are sort of the key value adds of this, but also always current. So you will be always on the most latest technology. Updates from the Microsoft Container Registry are provided to you, and deployment cadences are set by you in accordance with your policies. This way, your on-premise databases can stay up to date while ensuring that you keep control. And because it's a subscription service, no longer need to face those end of support situations with your databases. Like, that just blows my mind. And then we've got elastic scale. So and I like the wording around this. It's cloud-like elasticity, because it enables you to scale your databases up, down, dynamically, much as the same way that you do in Azure, but it is based on the available capacity within your infrastructure that you're running on. But this capability can really satisfy quite a lot of those burst scenarios that have volatile needs, including scenarios that require ingesting and querying data in real time at any scale, with sub-second response time. In addition, you can also scale out database instances using unique hyperscale deployment option of Azure Database for Postgres Hyperscale, which we've not covered today. But this capability gives data workloads an additional boost on capacity optimization using unique scale out reads and writes. And then we've also got that self-provisioning, right? Azure Arc allowing you to basically provide cloud benefits such as fast deployment and automation at scale, all thanks to the Kubernetes-based orchestration underneath. Means that basically Zach here, our data professional, deployed a database in literally seconds, and you can do that using either the GUI or the CLI tools, or whatever way that you like to interact with Azure in your databases. And personally, I just think that this is insane. I love it. And Michael, I know you do too. What are your sort of, just as we wrap up, what do you love the most about this new capability that Azure Arc is bringing?
So I love the fact that it's container-based, which means I get that level of isolation, right? So every managed instance that I stand up is an isolated instance of the SQL Server process that's isolated from everything else. So it's really taking those benefits of virtualization and making it even lighter weight. So I have the high availability of the underlying Kubernetes infrastructure. I have the ability to move that pod across nodes. If the pod has an issue and needs to be destroyed and recreated, I can recreate the pod, or it will handle recreating the pod on its own, and then reattaching the persistent storage to that new instance of the pod. And one of the things that we didn't cover, so our databases were simple single replica databases, but this does support multiple replicas as well. So you can say, all right, I want to create a database with 3 replicas, and it's using always on availability groups under the covers to be able to accomplish that. So you can have that high availability to protect beyond the pod level as well. So so I can make sure that my data stays up and running even if that instance of the pod fails. So you have that that additional level of protection.
Awesome. Awesome. Well, I just want to say a massive thank you to everyone who joined us for this session, but also to my friend and colleague, Michael. Thanks for virtually traveling across the pond to attend Data Scotland's Scottish summer. Maybe you can actually come over when we do have some sunshine. And yeah, we've moved on from the place that we're currently in. So I just want to say a massive thank you, Michael, for helping me put this together. I really appreciate it.
Thank you for having me.
And if anyone wants to reach out to myself or Michael, you can see our Twitter handles on the screen there. So I'm at Lisa at the Edge, and you can get Michael at SQL Tech Mike. Thank you so much for having us, and we hope to see you all in person sometime soon. Bye.